The Lost Melody. Alex had lived in the orphanage for as long as he could remember. Its cold, sterile walls were the only reality he knew, and though he had become accustomed to the routine, it never quite felt like home. He and his younger sister, Emma, had arrived together, though Emma was a far more adaptable child. She had a way of making friends with the other children, always quick to laugh and find comfort in the small joys of life. But Alex had never been like that. He was quiet, withdrawn, a boy with a look in his eyes that seemed to reflect a world beyond the orphanage's gates. For years, Alex had clung to the image of a house in his mind, a mansion that seemed as though it belonged to someone else. It was always the same. The house was grand, with tall windows, shining marble floors, and walls covered in beautiful paintings. His memory would often wander to the living room, where a grand white piano sat in the corner, its keys calling to him, though he had never once touched it. He remembered a warmth, a sense of belonging, even though he had never known the place in the way one would know their home. Whenever he tried to describe it to the caregivers, their faces would soften, but they would brush him off. "Poor children like you don't come from places like that," they'd say. "Children of the rich stay sheltered. They don't end up in places like this." At first, Alex had been confused by their dismissive tone. But over time, the dismissals turned to mockery, and the caregivers would laugh when he spoke of the mansion. They would say, "It's just a dream, Alex. A dream of things you could never have. You are here now, and that's all that matters." Even though they insisted it was all fantasy, the image of the house stayed with him. It remained so vivid in his mind, as real as any memory of the orphanage. He couldn't explain it, and no one seemed to care to listen. But Alex couldn't let go of the feeling that the house was where he truly belonged. Another part of Alex's story was the violin. The old black violin case that he had clung to tightly the moment he was brought to the orphanage. The caregivers had tried to pry it from his arms, but Alex had held on fiercely, his small hands refusing to let go. It was a simple violin, nothing more than an ordinary instrument, but to Alex, it was priceless. It was the last tether to a life he couldn't fully recall, the last piece of something he had lost. When the workers finally managed to take it from him, Alex had retreated into himself, silent and withdrawn, as if the very act of separating him from the violin severed a connection to his past. They never found a note, no clue to link the violin to a family or a name. It was as if Alex and Emma had simply appeared out of nowhere. The workers had been baffled by their arrival, dirty, frightened, and with no story of how they had come to be there. But despite the lack of answers, they did their best to care for the children. In the early days, Alex had been so scared that he barely spoke. He would sit by the window sill, staring out at the world beyond the orphanage, waiting for something, someone, to come for him. He would often sing softly to himself, a quiet, wistful tune that seemed to fill the silence around him. The other children didn't understand. Some would whisper about how Alex was weird, how he wouldn't talk to anyone, but Emma was always there for him. She would sit beside him, her small hand resting on his, and she would patiently wait for him to open up. But Alex kept most things to himself, only opening up when he was alone with his violin. At night, after the other children had gone to bed, he would sneak into the music room and play. The notes that came from the violin were soft at first, like a whisper from the past, but as time went on, they grew bolder. The violin became his refuge, his way of coping with the silence that surrounded him. The music filled the empty spaces in his heart, giving him a sense of peace that he couldn't find anywhere else. Though the music was a comfort, it only deepened the mystery of Alex's past. The melody that seemed to flow so naturally from his fingertips, though simple, had an undeniable power to it, a haunting beauty that few could ignore. When Alex played, the air seemed to thrum with energy, as though the music was stirring something long forgotten, something waiting to be awakened. One winter's day, as the first snowflakes of the season fell gently outside, Alex found himself once again on the window sill. He was watching the snowflakes drift past the glass, wondering if they might carry some kind of message from the world beyond the orphanage. Emma was sitting beside him, drawing in her notebook, but Alex wasn't paying attention to her. His mind was elsewhere, lost in thought, when he heard a faint sound, distant but unmistakable. The sound was music. It was soft at first, almost imperceptible over the howling wind outside, but it was there. A violin's notes, so delicate and pure, filled the air. Alex's heart began to race. He turned to Emma, his eyes wide with excitement. "Do you hear that?" Emma looked up, startled by the intensity in his voice. She nodded slowly, clearly hearing it too. The music seemed to carry through the building, and though it was familiar, Alex couldn't place it. It was a melody that resonated deep within him, something he had heard before but could never quite recall. Alex's curiosity grew. Without a word, he jumped up from the window sill and made his way toward the music. Emma followed, hesitantly at first, but then with a quiet determination. They crept through the hallways, trying not to disturb the other children who were resting or playing. The music led them to the music room, where the door was slightly ajar. As they pushed the door open, the sight that greeted them made Alex's heart skip a beat. In the center of the room stood a woman, her back to them. She was holding a violin, her fingers dancing gracefully across the strings as she played the very melody that had filled the air. The woman's hair was dark, flowing down her back in waves that caught the dim light of the room. Alex's breath caught in his throat. The music she played was the same music he had been dreaming about for years, the very melody that had lived in his soul. He couldn't explain it, but everything inside him told him that this woman was connected to him in some way. Her presence felt familiar, as though she belonged in the house he had never known, the house that lived in his dreams. But how could this be? He didn't know her, and yet, he felt like he had always known her. The woman stopped playing as Alex and Emma entered the room. Her eyes met Alex's, and there was a flicker of recognition in her gaze. She smiled softly, as though she had been waiting for this moment. "Alex," she said, her voice as gentle as the music. "I've been waiting for you." Alex's heart raced. He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. His mind was a blur, and yet he couldn't look away from her. There was something in her eyes, something that reached deep within him, pulling him closer to the truth. "Who are you?" Alex finally managed to whisper. The woman smiled, a tender smile full of understanding. "I am someone from your past, Alex. Someone you've been searching for without even knowing it." Alex's hands trembled as he reached out toward her. His mind raced with questions. How did she know his name? What was she doing here? And why did the music feel so familiar, like it belonged to a time long ago? The woman placed the violin down carefully, as though it were a precious treasure. She stepped toward him, her eyes never leaving his. "I am your mother," she said quietly, her voice filled with both sadness and hope. For a moment, everything went still. The room seemed to quiet, the air thick with the weight of her words. Alex's mind reeled. This couldn't be true. It couldn't be. But her words, her presence, everything about her seemed to resonate with something deep within him, something buried under years of uncertainty. "Your family, Alex, it's time to come home," she whispered. Alex's heart pounded in his chest. Could it really be true? Could the dreams, the music, the house, could it all be real? The recollection. The words hung in the air, heavy and uncertain. "I am your mother," she had said, her voice so calm and tender that it seemed to pierce through the layers of doubt that had built up over the years. Alex stood motionless, his mind a whirlwind of confusion. Was this possible? Was this woman truly his mother, the one he had been searching for all this time without even realizing it? He had spent his entire life in the orphanage, holding on to the fragments of memories that felt like wisps of smoke. Intangible and fleeting. The mansion with its tall windows, the soft echo of the piano keys, and the haunting melody that had followed him through the years. He had never once questioned the validity of these memories, but now, standing before the woman who claimed to be his mother, everything felt so unreal. Could the woman in front of him really be the same figure from his fragmented dreams? The one whose presence had always been just out of reach, like the last note of a song fading away before it could be caught? For a long moment, Alex couldn't speak. His throat felt dry, his words lost in the turmoil inside him. The woman, his mother, if it were true, watched him closely, her eyes filled with understanding and a hint of sadness, as though she had been waiting for this moment for a long time. "I know you must be confused," she said softly, her voice soothing, "but everything you've been feeling, the music, the house, the memories, are real. They were always meant to be part of your story." Alex blinked, trying to make sense of her words. His gaze flickered to Emma, who stood silently by his side, her eyes wide with a mix of awe and disbelief. Emma had always been the one to carry a quiet, unwavering hope that somehow, somewhere, their family still existed. Alex, however, had resigned himself to the reality of their life at the orphanage, but now, with the possibility of this woman being his mother, everything he had known about his past suddenly seemed in question. Emma's hand found Alex's, and she squeezed it gently, silently asking him to take the first step. Her own voice broke the stillness. "Is it really you?" Emma asked, her tone full of the same mix of hope and uncertainty. "Can it be?" The woman smiled, a warmth in her expression that made Alex's heart ache with a feeling he couldn't place. She nodded slowly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Yes, Emma. It's me," she said. "I've never stopped thinking about you both. And I've always known that one day, this day, would come. You were never meant to be apart from me." Her words sent a wave of emotion crashing over Alex. He had spent so many years wondering what had happened to them, why they had ended up here, why he couldn't remember more about his life before the orphanage. Now, standing before him, this woman seemed to hold the key to all those questions, but the flood of emotions was overwhelming. It felt like the pieces of a puzzle that had been scattered across time were slowly falling into place. "I don't understand," Alex whispered, his voice shaky. "Why didn't you come for us sooner? Why didn't you?" The woman reached out, her hand resting gently on his shoulder. Her touch was warm, grounding, and Alex felt the comfort of it sink deep into his bones. "I never wanted to leave you, Alex," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I was forced to." She paused, collecting herself. "Your father, he wanted to keep you both away from me. There were things happening that I couldn't control, things that I couldn't explain at the time." Alex frowned, trying to make sense of her words. "What do you mean? What happened?" The woman's gaze flickered to the window, as though searching for the right words. She turned back to face him, her eyes filled with both pain and determination. "I was part of a world, of a life, that your father didn't approve of. Our family, we weren't just ordinary people. There were forces at play, people who wanted to keep us apart. I tried to fight it. I tried to find a way to keep you both safe, but..." She trailed off, her voice breaking slightly. Alex could see the depth of sorrow in her eyes, and for the first time, he realized that this woman, the woman who claimed to be his mother, had suffered. She had endured more than he could possibly imagine, and the thought made something stir in his chest. He wanted to understand, to know why their family had been torn apart, but the question that lingered in his mind was a difficult one to ask. "Why didn't you send for us? Why didn't we know who you were?" The woman's face hardened for a moment, and she looked down at the violin that rested against her side. For a long time, she didn't speak, and Alex wondered if she would answer him. Then, finally, she looked up at him, her voice quiet but firm. "Because I was hiding, Alex. For your protection. For Emma's protection. I couldn't risk anyone finding out where you were. Your father, he had connections, dangerous ones. And I knew that if anyone knew the truth, it would put you both in harm's way. Alex's mind raced, but there was something about her words that resonated with him. He could feel it deep inside. This woman, his mother, had made incredible sacrifices for them. The life she had led wasn't one of luxury or ease, as he had once imagined. It was filled with danger, uncertainty, and loss. "What happened to you?" Emma asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper, the vulnerability in her words palpable. The woman sighed, her shoulders sagging slightly. "I was forced to disappear. I was separated from you both, and I couldn't make contact. But I never stopped searching. Never stopped looking for you. The truth is, I thought you were lost to me forever." Alex could feel the weight of her words settle over him. For years, he had felt as if something was missing, as if a part of him was incomplete. And now, in front of him, the woman who had once been the center of his life was here, but it didn't feel as simple as he had imagined. She was a stranger, and yet, there was an undeniable connection between them. The violin, the music, it all made sense now. It wasn't just a song, it was a piece of their past, a memory they had shared. It was the key to everything. "I remember," Alex said quietly, his voice almost trembling. "I remember the music. I remember the house, the paintings, the piano. It's all so real to me, even though I don't understand why." The woman's eyes softened, and she took a step closer to him. She placed a hand on his cheek, her touch gentle but firm. "That's because it is real, Alex. That house, the music, it was part of our life together. It's part of who you are. You are my son. You have a family waiting for you. And it's time for you to come home." The words hung in the air, but they didn't feel like an invitation, they felt like a promise. A promise that there was more to their story than the orphanage, more to their past than the pain and uncertainty that had clouded their lives. "I'm ready," Alex said, his voice steady. For the first time in his life, he felt the weight of the past lifting, as if the lost pieces were coming together. But as the woman smiled, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and hope, there was a question in the back of Alex's mind. What would it mean to leave the orphanage, to leave behind everything he had known, and step into a world that had once been hidden from him? His gaze met Emma's, and he knew she, too, was grappling with the enormity of it all. But despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, there was something undeniable about the pull to uncover the truth of their past. "Let's go," Emma said, her voice quiet but full of resolve. And with that simple statement, the course of their lives shifted. The path to their true home was finally within reach, and Alex knew that, no matter the challenges ahead, they were no longer alone. The road to reclamation. The room was still, save for the quiet hum of the old wooden floors under their feet. The words spoken by the woman, Alex's mother, echoed in Alex's mind, reverberating through the walls of the orphanage. "You are my son. You have a family waiting for you." He had always imagined the day he would find his true family, but he had never envisioned it quite like this. He had expected joy, maybe a rush of reunion, but all he felt was a deep, strange pull in his chest. There was a yearning for something more, something far beyond the confines of the orphanage. Alex glanced over at Emma. She stood quietly by his side, her small hand resting in his, but her face was a mixture of confusion, awe, and something Alex could not quite place. Emma had always been the more open of the two of them, always quick to embrace new things, new people, but now Alex could see that even she was struggling to understand what was happening. They had lived in the orphanage for so long that it almost felt as if their past was a distant story, an unfinished dream, lost in the fog of time. And yet, here it was, suddenly tangible. The woman, his mother, watched them both, her expression softening as she took a step toward them. "I know this is overwhelming," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "There are so many things you don't understand yet. But I promise you, everything will make sense soon. The pieces of your past, your real past, are waiting to be found. Alex wanted to ask 100 questions. Where had she been all these years? Why had she let them grow up without her? What was this life she had been a part of, this world he had only begun to glimpse through the window of music and dreams? But the words felt too heavy to ask, too loaded with years of silence and unanswered longing. Emma squeezed his hand gently, as if reading his thoughts. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice small but filled with determination. "Are we going back? Is it time?" The woman nodded. "Yes, it's time," she said, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at her lips. "I know you've been through a lot, and I know this is sudden, but you are both stronger than you realize. We have a lot of ground to cover before we can truly come home, but everything is in motion now. We can't go back to that life you knew, the orphanage, the past we've left behind. That part of your story is finished. Now, you will come with me, to the place where you truly belong." For a moment, Alex simply stared at her. He was overwhelmed by a rush of emotions, confusion, disbelief, wonder. He had spent so many years imagining what his family might have been like, wondering about his past. But what was waiting for them now was unknown territory, a world that felt both familiar and strange, as though it existed in a realm just beyond his grasp. "We're not going to the mansion yet," the woman continued, as though reading his thoughts. "There are things I need to explain first. There's a world outside that you've never known, people who are a part of your family, people who will help guide you. It's a life that has been waiting for you, but there are dangers, too. I've kept you safe for as long as I could, but now, the time has come for you to step into it." The mention of danger struck Alex like a cold gust of wind. He turned his gaze toward Emma, who seemed just as confused as he felt. She was gripping his hand tightly, her eyes filled with a mixture of concern and curiosity. For all the mystery and strangeness surrounding their past, Emma was as ready as he was to step into whatever came next. The thought of their family, the dream of a home filled with music and warmth, was too powerful to resist. Are we in danger?" Alex asked, his voice barely above a whisper. His mother's gaze grew serious, her eyes darkening with a shadow of caution. "There are forces that would rather keep you in the dark. Forces that would stop you from reclaiming what is rightfully yours. I've kept you away from them for your safety, but now you must be ready. The world you are stepping into is not just full of love and beauty, it's also full of challenges. And the truth I've kept hidden for so long might not be easy for you to accept. But I promise you, it is the only way forward." Alex's heart pounded in his chest. The fear in his mother's voice was palpable, and it made his stomach churn. What kind of world were they stepping into? The life his mother had alluded to, was it a world of danger, a place filled with dark secrets and hidden truths? Emma tugged on his sleeve gently, her voice shaking with a quiet resolve. "We'll be okay, won't we, Alex?" she asked, her eyes searching his face for reassurance. Alex looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her question. He didn't have the answers. He didn't know what awaited them beyond the walls of the orphanage, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't alone. He had Emma. And now, they had their mother. No matter what dangers lay ahead, he would face them with her by his side. "Yes," he said softly, his voice filled with quiet determination. "We'll be okay." His mother smiled at him, the sadness in her eyes fading just a little. She reached out and touched his cheek, her fingers warm against his skin. "You're stronger than you know, Alex. And Emma, too. Your strength will be your guide, and the love you have for each other will be the anchor that keeps you grounded. No matter what happens, remember that you are never alone." With those words, a new sense of purpose began to form in Alex's chest. He had been lost for so long, unsure of where he came from, unsure of who he was. But now, standing here, with his sister beside him and his mother finally revealing the truth of their past, Alex felt the weight of his heritage settling on his shoulders. It was a responsibility, yes, but it was also a promise. A promise to protect Emma, to face whatever dangers lay ahead, and to discover the truth of who he was. His mother stepped back, taking a deep breath as she surveyed them both. "There's no turning back now," she said softly. "Once we leave here, everything will change. But I have faith in you both. Together, you will be ready for whatever comes next." With those final words, she turned toward the door, her movements graceful and assured. Alex and Emma followed, their footsteps echoing in the hallway as they left the orphanage behind. The cold air of the world outside greeted them as they stepped through the door, and Alex felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. He was about to step into a life that was not only foreign but dangerous, a life that held both beauty and shadows in equal measure. As they walked down the path, leaving the place that had been their home for so long, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that something monumental was about to unfold. The music that had been a part of his life for as long as he could remember hummed in his chest, a reminder that the past was never truly gone. It lived inside him, guiding him forward, pulling him toward a future that was waiting to be reclaimed. But with every step they took, Alex couldn't help but wonder, what kind of world would they be walking into? And would they be ready to face whatever truths and dangers awaited them? The answer, he knew, would come in time. But for now, the only thing that mattered was the promise of family, the promise of home, and the courage to embrace the unknown, the hidden path. The world beyond the orphanage was strange, unfamiliar, and full of possibilities. The road ahead seemed endless, and the weight of uncertainty pressed heavily against Alex's chest. As the trio walked away from the orphanage's gates, Alex couldn't help but feel the finality of leaving behind the only life he had known. The familiar sounds of the orphanage, the creaking of the floorboards, the laughter of children echoing in the halls, faded into the background. Everything that had once been a constant in his life was now a distant memory. But the road they were on wasn't a typical one. His mother had warned them that they would have to move quickly, avoiding public areas as much as possible. The danger she had mentioned was never far from their minds. Alex's pulse quickened with every shadow that loomed over them, every rustle in the trees that could be a sign of someone, or something, watching them. The world was no longer safe in the way he had once believed it to be. Emma walked closely beside him, her hand gripping his arm as they moved through the narrow streets of the town. Her face was a mask of apprehension and curiosity, but there was a quiet determination behind her eyes. She had always been the one to ask questions, to challenge the limits of their small world, but now, in this new reality, Alex could sense that her fears were starting to surface. She was no longer the carefree child who had clung to hope through all their years in the orphanage. The truth had shattered that illusion, and now she was starting to see the world in a different light, one where shadows moved and secrets lurked in the corners. The woman, Alex's mother, led them with a quiet confidence. She moved with purpose, her steps sure and deliberate as though she had walked this path 1,000 times before. She seemed different now, her eyes holding an edge of caution, a sharpness that Alex hadn't seen before. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and in its place, he saw the weight of experience and the knowledge of what awaited them. "How far is it?" Alex asked, his voice breaking the silence that had settled between them. He had been wondering for some time now where they were headed, but every question he asked was met with vague answers or assurances that they would be safe. It was frustrating, but he understood. His mother was protecting them, keeping them in the dark until it was absolutely necessary to reveal more. "We are going to a safe house," his mother replied, her voice low but firm. "It's a place where we can regroup, plan, and gather information. It's not far, but we have to be cautious. The people I've been avoiding for years still have eyes everywhere. They won't stop until they find us." Alex swallowed hard. He had no idea what these people were, what they wanted, or why they were after them. The words "safe house" felt out of place, as though they were part of a world that was foreign to him. His life had been simple, he had been a child, learning how to survive day by day, trying to forget about a past that had seemed too far removed from the present. But now, with his mother's revelations, he realized how little he knew about the world they had left behind. There was a whole world out there, one that Alex had never even dreamed of. "Who are these people?" Emma asked, her voice almost a whisper as she leaned in closer to Alex. His mother glanced at them both, her face darkening. "They are part of a group, an organization that has been hunting us for years. They're not just ordinary people, they have resources, influence. And they want something from me, from our family." Her gaze flickered to Alex, as though contemplating how much to reveal. "But we'll be safe for now. I won't let anything happen to you." The certainty in her voice calmed Alex, but only slightly. His mind was still racing with questions, none of which had been answered yet. He wanted to know who these people were, why they had been hunted, and why they couldn't simply return to the life they had left behind. But with every step they took, the tension in the air thickened, and it became clear that the answers would come, but only when the time was right. The streets began to narrow as they ventured deeper into a quieter part of town. The buildings here were older, their walls weathered and worn from years of neglect. The familiar hum of activity was absent, replaced by an eerie stillness that made Alex uneasy. The faint sound of the wind rustling through the trees was the only noise that broke the silence. It was as though they were entering a forgotten part of the world, a place that didn't belong to the ordinary lives of the people who still moved in the city center. Alex's eyes darted around, searching for any sign of movement, any hint that they were being followed. He didn't trust this silence. It felt wrong. He had been taught to be cautious, to observe and listen, but the stillness seemed too complete, too suffocating. As they continued walking, Alex noticed a tall gate looming ahead, its iron bars twisted into intricate patterns. The gate was barely visible in the fading light, but he could make out the silhouette of a building beyond it. It was a large house, hidden away behind a wall of ivy and trees. The safe house, Alex realized. His mother approached the gate, her steps confident. She didn't hesitate, but there was a tense energy in her movements, as if she expected something to go wrong at any moment. With a few swift motions, she unlocked the gate and pushed it open, revealing a narrow path that led to the front door of the house. The house was grand but not in the way Alex had imagined. It wasn't the bright, welcoming mansion he had once dreamed of. Instead, it had a quiet, weathered elegance to it. The windows were dark, and the stone walls had begun to show signs of age, but there was something undeniably safe about it. Something that told Alex that this was the place they would finally find answers. As they approached the front door, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into a different world, one filled with secrets and hidden histories that had been kept from him for so long. His mother had said that everything would become clear soon, but Alex wasn't sure if he was ready to face the truth. What if the past they were about to uncover was too much to handle? What if the dangers his mother had warned them about were even greater than they could imagine? His thoughts were interrupted as the door creaked open. A figure stood in the doorway, a man with sharp eyes and a stern expression. His gaze swept over Alex and Emma, but it lingered on their mother. Without a word, the man stepped aside, allowing them to enter. Inside, the house was dimly lit, the air thick with the scent of old wood and parchment. The walls were lined with shelves filled with books, many of them ancient-looking, their spines cracked from years of use. There were maps on the walls, some of them faded and yellowed with age, others marked with symbols Alex couldn't decipher. The furniture was heavy and dark, a stark contrast to the bright, airy rooms he had imagined in his dreams. "This is where we'll stay for now," the man said, his voice deep and gravelly. "It's safe here, but we can't stay long. We'll need to move again soon." Alex's mother nodded, her expression hardening. "We'll be ready." As they stepped further into the house, Alex felt the weight of history pressing down on him. This was no ordinary place. It was filled with knowledge, with mysteries waiting to be uncovered. And it was here, in this house, that he would begin to unravel the truth about his family, his past, and the forces that had been watching them for so long. But even as he walked through the door, the unease in his chest did not fade. It only grew stronger, as if the answers he was seeking might come at a cost he wasn't prepared to pay. "Rest," his mother said, her voice gentle but firm. "Tomorrow, we begin." Alex nodded, but as he glanced at Emma, he knew that neither of them would sleep easily that night. There was too much uncertainty, too many unknowns. And as the night settled in around them, one question echoed in his mind: what kind of world had his family truly come from, and what had they been hiding from all these years? The unraveling of secrets. The house was quiet that night, its walls thick with the weight of history. The air inside felt dense, laden with a sense of purpose that Alex couldn't shake. He and Emma had been given separate rooms, tucked away in a corridor at the far end of the house, but sleep didn't come easily. The events of the day, the revelation of their true identity, the sudden change in their lives, and the looming presence of unseen enemies, kept Alex awake. His mind buzzed with questions. Why had his mother been away for so long? Why had they been left in the orphanage? What was it about their family that made them a target? The answers felt just beyond his grasp, like pieces of a puzzle scattered in the wind, always out of reach. But he knew one thing for certain: whatever had been hidden from them, whatever secrets had been buried, would soon come to light. He tossed and turned, unable to escape the weight of it all. In the quiet darkness, Emma's voice echoed in his mind. "Are we really safe here, Alex?" She hadn't said those words aloud, but the question lingered in his thoughts, like a whisper in the corners of his mind. Could they trust this place? Could they trust their mother? The house was filled with secrets, that much was clear. It wasn't just a safe house, it was a place of mystery, a place that seemed to belong to another time, another world altogether. After what felt like hours, Alex finally got out of bed. The need to understand, to uncover the truth, was too powerful to ignore. He stood in front of the window, staring out at the moonlit garden beyond. The night was still, the silence stretching out in all directions, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves in the trees. His fingers instinctively brushed against the violin case, which was sitting by his bedside. He had kept it close ever since they had left the orphanage, as though it were a part of him that he couldn't leave behind. It was his only connection to his past, the only tangible reminder of a life he couldn't fully remember. There were moments when the music from that violin felt like a lifeline, pulling him forward into something he couldn't yet understand. The notes seemed to carry with them the echoes of his past, whispering to him from a time long gone. Alex ran his hand over the smooth surface of the case, his fingers lingering on the worn leather. He didn't remember learning to play, but the music that came from it when he did was always perfect. It was as though the violin was an extension of his soul. But now, as he stood there, looking out at the garden, the idea that his past was tied to this instrument suddenly felt more significant. He wasn't just a boy who had been abandoned in an orphanage, there was something more, something deeper, about the violin. It was a thread that connected him to a past he had never fully understood. With a deep breath, Alex pulled the violin case from the floor and opened it. The instrument was as familiar to him as his own heartbeat. He ran his fingers along the strings, gently testing the tension, letting the familiar weight of the violin ground him. There was a comfort in it, a sense of calm that he couldn't explain. His hands moved almost instinctively, drawing the bow across the strings in a slow, deliberate motion. The sound that filled the room was hauntingly beautiful, a melody that felt both ancient and new at the same time. But just as the music began to calm his restless mind, a sharp knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Alex froze, his fingers stilling on the strings. The knock was followed by a soft voice, one that sounded both familiar and distant. "Alex," his mother's voice called from the other side of the door. "We need to talk." Alex quickly placed the violin back in its case, his heart racing. He had no idea what his mother wanted, but the urgency in her voice sent a shiver down his spine. He opened the door to find her standing there, her face tight with concern. "We need to leave," she said without preamble. "Something has happened. They've found us." Alex's heart skipped a beat. "Who's found us? What's going on?" His mother looked over her shoulder, as if ensuring they were not being overheard. "It's them. The people I've been running from. They've tracked us here. We can't stay any longer. We have to leave, now." A cold fear settled in Alex's stomach. He had barely had time to adjust to the idea of his family, of the life they had left behind, and now it was all in jeopardy again. He glanced at Emma's door, wondering if she was awake, but his mother stopped him with a hand on his arm. "Don't wake her," she said softly. "We don't want to panic her. We'll take care of this quietly. But we have to move quickly." Alex nodded, his pulse pounding in his ears. He had no choice but to trust his mother. She had always been there for them, even when they didn't know she was. But now, as the danger became more real, he could sense the weight of the decisions she was making. She wasn't just trying to protect them from the dangers of the world, she was fighting to keep them safe from forces that were far more powerful than anything he had imagined. The house felt even more oppressive now, as though it were closing in around them. The sense of isolation that had been a comfort just hours ago now felt like a trap. There were no easy answers, no safe haven they could run to. All Alex could do was follow his mother and trust that she knew what she was doing. They moved swiftly through the house, stepping lightly on the creaky floors. Alex's mother was quiet but efficient, her eyes scanning every corner of the room, every shadow, as though she expected something, or someone, to emerge at any moment. As they reached the back door, Alex heard a faint rustling in the distance, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps. His heart lurched. They weren't alone. His mother grabbed his arm and pulled him toward the back door, but just as they reached it, a loud bang echoed from the front of the house. The sound of it was jarring, like a warning shot fired into the silence of the night. Alex's breath caught in his throat. They had been found. The door burst open, and a man stepped into the doorway, tall, dark, and menacing, with cold eyes that seemed to pierce right through Alex. "Going somewhere," the man said, his voice low and dangerous. Alex's mother stepped in front of him instinctively, her posture rigid with tension. "Get out of our way," she said, her voice firm but filled with an undercurrent of fear. The man didn't move. Instead, he reached into his coat and pulled out something, a small, gleaming object that Alex couldn't quite make out in the dim light. The man's eyes flickered toward the violin case, and Alex felt a cold rush of realization. They weren't just after them, they were after something more. Something Alex didn't yet understand, but the truth was slowly unraveling before him, piece by piece. Alex's mother didn't hesitate. She pushed him behind her and took a step forward, her body tense with anticipation. "You don't know who you're dealing with," she warned, her voice now trembling with a mix of anger and fear. "Leave us alone." The man smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was a predatory grin, the smile of someone who had no intention of leaving without a fight. "You'll regret that," he said, his words laced with venom. "You can't escape what's coming." And with those words, the world Alex had known, the small, fragile world of an orphan, began to crumble. The man's presence, the chilling certainty in his voice, made it clear, Alex's life, the life he had just begun to reclaim, was not just in danger. It was about to change forever. In that moment, the path ahead seemed clearer than ever. They weren't just fighting for a place to call home anymore. They were fighting for their survival. And whatever it took, Alex was ready to face whatever came next, the gathering storm. The man stood in the doorway, blocking their only escape route, his presence looming like a shadow that had no intention of leaving. Alex could feel the tension in the air, thick, oppressive, suffocating. His heart pounded in his chest, every beat a reminder that everything they had fought for, everything they had hoped for, was slipping through their fingers. "Who are you?" Alex's mother demanded, her voice low but sharp, the edge of her tone betraying the fear she was struggling to suppress. "What do you want from us?" The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward, the floorboards creaking under his weight. His cold eyes flickered over Alex, Emma, and their mother, as though assessing them with a detached, calculating gaze. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. "You really don't know, do you?" he said finally, his voice filled with a quiet amusement. "How quaint." His lips curled into a faint, humorless smile. "I suppose that makes it easier for me." Alex's stomach twisted. There was something about the way the man spoke that made it clear he had no intention of backing down. This wasn't just a threat, it was a promise, and it sent a chill running through him. "Stay back, Alex," his mother said, her eyes narrowing with a mixture of determination and dread. "Whatever happens, do not engage with him. I will protect you. I always have." Alex wanted to protest, to demand to know why this man was threatening them, why their past had come to haunt them, but the words stuck in his throat. It was as though the world had gone silent, leaving only the steady, ominous rhythm of his heartbeat. Emma, still half asleep and confused, clung to Alex's side, her small frame trembling. "You're in over your head," the man continued, his gaze turning cold as he stepped even closer. "You really think you can hide from us forever? You should have stayed in your little cage, in that orphanage, where we left you. It's too late now. You've come far enough to be dangerous." Alex's mother took a step forward, her body tense but resolute. "We'll never go back. We've escaped the cage you put us in, and we're not going to be caged again." The man's eyes flashed with something darker than anger, something more sinister, something Alex didn't fully understand but felt in his bones. "You still don't get it," he said softly, his words dripping with venom. "You're not escaping. You're only running deeper into our hands. Your little game is over." Before Alex could process the threat, the man's eyes darted to the violin case in Alex's hands. It felt like the air around him froze, the tension thickening. His mother stiffened, her eyes narrowing. "No," she whispered, as though speaking to herself. "Ah," the man said, his voice taking on a more satisfied tone. "So that's it. The little violin. How fitting." He chuckled darkly, the sound sending a shiver down Alex's spine. "It was always the key, wasn't it? It's not just a gift, Alex. It's a mark." The realization hit Alex like a bolt of lightning. His grip on the violin case tightened, the weight of it suddenly feeling too heavy to bear. The violin was more than just an instrument, it was a symbol, a marker of something he couldn't yet comprehend. And whatever that something was, the man standing in front of him knew exactly what it meant. "What do you know about it?" Alex demanded, his voice cracking with a mixture of fear and frustration. "What does it have to do with us?" The man smiled, but this time, the smile was laced with disdain. "You really don't know? How utterly pathetic. The violin, your mother's legacy, it all ties into something far larger than you realize. But you'll learn soon enough." Alex's mind raced, his thoughts tumbling over one another in a desperate attempt to understand. He could sense the truth was close, just on the horizon, but he couldn't yet grasp it. The violin wasn't just an object of his past, it was a key to something else, something dangerous, something the man in front of them was desperate to control. The man stepped closer still, his figure towering over Alex. "But I won't waste any more time. The moment you picked up that violin, you sealed your fate. Now you belong to us. And there's nothing you can do to change that." With that, the man reached into his coat again and pulled out a small device, a strange, metallic object that hummed with an unnatural energy. Alex's instincts flared, and before he could stop himself, he stepped backward, shielding Emma with his body. His heart was racing. What was that device? And what was it going to do to them? But Alex's mother was quicker. In a flash, she had moved between them and the man, her eyes blazing with an intensity Alex had never seen before. "Leave my children alone," she growled, the words laced with a fury that was both terrifying and protective. The man's expression faltered for a fraction of a second. Just a moment, but it was enough. He hesitated, as though considering something. Then, without warning, he raised the device, and the air seemed to crackle with energy. Alex's mother lunged toward him, but the moment she did, the man activated the device. A pulse of bright light shot through the room, followed by a deafening hum that rattled the walls. It wasn't like anything Alex had ever felt before. It was as if the very fabric of reality was bending, warping, and for a split second, everything around him seemed to freeze. Alex's mother staggered back, her eyes wide with shock and pain, but she didn't fall. She stood her ground, grimacing as though the energy from the device was burning her. "What is that?" Alex gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. The man's smile returned, this time cruel and triumphant. "A device that ensures you can't run any farther. It disrupts the body's ability to move, to fight back. It's a simple thing, really. But effective." Alex's blood ran cold. His mother was struggling, her body twitching with the effects of the device, but she refused to fall. It was clear she had been prepared for something like this, but the toll it was taking on her was evident. "Stop," Alex demanded, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. "Leave her alone." The man turned his gaze toward Alex, eyes darkening. "You think I'm just going to let you walk away?" he sneered. "No. You're mine now. All of you." The room seemed to grow smaller, and Alex's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. There was nothing left to do but fight back. They had no time to waste. They couldn't run. They had no choice. Alex had to protect Emma, and he had to protect his mother. The violin case in his hands was no longer just a memory of his past, it was the only thing standing between them and whatever this man was going to do next. He didn't have time to think. In a single motion, Alex opened the violin case and snatched the instrument, gripping it with both hands. The bow followed soon after, his fingers trembling as he placed it on the strings. There was no plan. There was no strategy. All he had was the music, the only weapon he knew how to use. With a deep breath, Alex brought the bow across the strings, and as the first note rang out, the world seemed to shift. It wasn't just the sound of the violin, it was something more. It was a call, an invocation of everything Alex was, everything he had been, and everything he was about to become. The notes soared, filling the room with a deep, resonating hum. For the first time, Alex felt like the violin was alive, like it was connected to him in a way he had never known. And as the sound spread out, he saw the man's expression shift, fear flickering in his eyes. The power of the music surged, pushing back against the device in the man's hand. The man stepped back, dropping the device, as if the music had a physical force of its own. And in that moment, Alex realized something: this violin, his connection to his past, wasn't just a part of him. It was a weapon. And it was the key to unlocking the truth of their family's legacy. "You can't control us," Alex said, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "We're not yours." The man took another step back, his face contorted in rage, but Alex's fingers danced over the strings, pulling the bow with a force he had never known he possessed. This was just the beginning. The storm had come. And Alex was ready to face whatever came next.